Hello, this is Al Fry, and the following presentation is going to explain why you have the potentials of being a genius and why many of us are cut off from this potential. Now, much of the material here has never been available before, not even in $300 seminars. So listen very carefully and review this data until it sinks in and motivates a positive outlook and action for you. To begin with, let's look at some of the things that block our mental potentials. As researchers delve into the statistics of illness, they seem to agree that anywhere from 60 to 90% of our human illnesses now stems from stress. As modern civilized living becomes increasingly complex, the stress on people becomes greater, and the hospitals remain constantly filled. And stress isn't anything unique to our species either. Chickens, rats, or even tigers, kept penned up in cages and subjected to noise repeatedly, will fall apart even more quickly than we humans. Well, many experiments have shown that most animals and birds will grow faster and remain healthy if they are soothed with music and given a little affection and variety in their life. On the other hand, piping in hard rock, stressful music to them will usually destroy them in short order. Well, humans, wishing to remain calm, then must watch their environment. Rock music that twangs away on their nerves all day will keep the body tense and unrelaxed. Loud noise all day in the work or home environment will have a similar effect. Environment plays a great part in lowering stress and bringing up the inner potentials we all carry. But when the human or any animal body is in a situation where its survival is threatened, it pumps more blood and oxygen and hormones through the system to get ready for fight or flight. Many of the body's normal secretions, stomach and intestinal actions virtually stop while this stress mode prevails. And since the various dominion systems running today's culture constantly threatens the human security, this means present civilized humans are under constant stress, and mental problems continually cause this action. Little wonder that people get caught in the usual rat race and fall apart from these mental stresses and pressures. Well, since most of the stress in civilization comes from non-physical pressures, this means that virtually all of our stress and illnesses are related to how our mental thoughts affect us. This astonishing insight is the key to escaping from the usual stressful situations and gaining more pleasure. Well, since it's one of our minds that is constantly comparing one situation against another, we have only to stop this mind action to regain our normal health and our mental abilities. Animals, you will observe, don't have this problem. Animals are happy in any situation if there's a little food and affection available. They do not have a mind to worry about things like keeping up payments or what their peers are going to think of them. Well, we humans are constantly subjected to negative conditioning environments. Every time we read a paper or see the news, we get a glimpse of chaos and threats to our future well-being. Their minds project this ahead and raises a fear factor, and this is devastating to the body in time. So because hundreds of thousands are being shot up in a third world brush war, or millions are dying of starvation in Africa, we tend to get concerned and stay uptight and agitated about it. To offset this somewhat, some persons should realize that they can do very little to help the situation and just let it go at that. When we look at the situation from a higher view, or a higher scheme, we see that if we were meant to experience these things firsthand, our soul or our Creator would have put us in such physical situations. And as it is, we must learn to balance ourselves wherever we're at and under whatever conditions we are in at the moment. Now, this means enjoying the simpler everyday pleasures around us, at least as much as we can, and part of the time. Even the great teacher, Christ, pointed out that we were to make a heaven on earth. Well, since it is one of the mind components that's always pumping thoughts and visual pictures into the brain, all that's actually required to stop the stress is to recognize which mind is pushing our buttons and stop it. And in the Modern Humans text, which we'll mention later, by A.B. Glaser, there's detailed sequence guide that shows which human components can stop and start the others. Now, once a human understands this action, they can shut off negative programming and stress at any time, mentally. They can be in virtually any situation and remain in a pleasure dwell with high-level mind function and abilities. Well, the well-known incidents of Christians in the lion's den and yogis in their perpetual states of bliss are examples of such control. Well, animals pick up on stress and fear and often do not detect or bother other species who are shielded by energies put up when we're in a pleasure dwell. Now, there are certain Eastern holy men who've had to learn to stay in this particular mental state through many years of discipline and practice. Well, psychologists in medicine are well aware of the role of the mind's thoughts in bringing on sickness. Wherever there are emotional problems for any length of time, there are usually secondary physical illnesses that crop up. Suppressed anger and hostility, fear, hate are typical primitive emotions that they know bring on the high blood pressure and the headaches and the ulcers and the allergies and paralysis and even worse. And unfortunately, professionals do not realize it is the brain and body reacting against the minds which brings on these problems. Well, the body of a human is no different than the body of any other animal in its need for pleasure and enjoyment. And after years of being denied pleasure, the body just gets sick. It gets sick and tired of the whole mind-oriented rat race, and it rebels to get some peace and quiet and relaxation. Well, what better way to get out of some depressing negative job or situation than getting sick? Even laying in a hospital bed is preferable to day after day of serious, joyless stress and work with no let-up at all. Animals under similar stress to humans don't hold up any better. Rats crowded in cages and fed junk food quickly sicken and die, and it's little wonder we humans have our hospitals just filled. We simply don't balance our lives with enough pleasure. Well, A.B. Glaser, the modern human founder, wrote several texts on the subject of human function, probably the most detailed texts on our planet. And I was constantly asking him questions. And the first thing that I noted in telling me that the first thing he asked himself in most areas of decision was whether the action or choice was going to be fun. If it wasn't going to be fun, he often didn't do it for his little animal's sake. He pointed out that most persons come up to you and they're in a negative dwell, and they try to drag you down, and they're not happy unless you're unhappy too. And he wasn't moved by this. He'd often turn the offers or situations down if the persons weren't going to be happy about the situations. And if you're going to bring up your natural body tone and abilities, you keep all this in mind, because it's advice that you'll ignore most of the time, but eventually it could change your life if you followed it. I might add that A.B. Glaser was conversing with his various mind and body components at a very early age, and he'd grown up assuming that everyone else did. Well, after all, people were constantly talking about changing their mind, and it seemed logical that people meant what they were talking about. It was quite a shock to him many years later when he found out that the term was just a random expression, and people had no conception of where their thoughts came from, least of all that they had more than one mind. Well, he felt that he'd better remedy the situation, so he put out the Comprehension courses in 1976, and they were the first texts ever done on the exact function and switching sequence of the minds. The other great philosophers of ancient times had sometimes touched on the subject, and even the South Seas natives had many deeper truths on multiple components than we of civilizations did. Yet no culture or work had all the pieces of the puzzle put together until Glaser. Well, after sending out quite a few of Glaser's courses, I began to get a constant trickle of amazing success stories from students who'd learned how effective this base knowledge was when put to use. Many students told of blocking pain at will, regaining and keeping their memory function, and getting instant answers to virtually all questions, and this from tapping their inner component knowledge and working so-called miracles whenever the need arose. Amazing feedback, amazing letters. Well, not all students had such success, of course, but from the feedback and contacts I had, I could see that much of humanity simply didn't want responsibility or the self-control. Well, after years of brainwashing and fitting into a domination groove, they'd often balk at trying these new concepts and switching out of fear and negativity. Most persons, I found, simply wanted to be led yet. Well, let's look at how some of this all fits together. Since it's pretty well accepted by deeper thinkers that all cells can communicate with each other, this clarifies why some persons can just come up with intuitional answers without the usual memory and logic sifting. Well, most of the world's high-level geniuses and mystical and spiritual teachers simply tapped in to their inner knowledge-gathering components and had little dependence on memory or the usual book-learning rules. Now, some of these Einsteins usually never seemed to be overly bright in school. They just learned to tap into their inner sources. Now, after all, if the cell can send data to the brain and get information from other intuitional or interlinked cells, there really isn't much knowledge that can't be tapped automatically. Well, A.B. Glaser, who we mentioned, did this tapping automatically. He called it flow line. When he wrote the first text on the animal body, he simply plugged in totally to the knowledge of his body. When he wrote of the mines, he'd contact each component that he wrote of. If he wrote of other subjects, he'd tap into the first-hand knowledge of them also. Now, there are many tabloid magazine articles on these subjects of people that can do this, can tap in and use very high-level ESP ability. And only a handful of the so-called masters have been able to do it in front of scientists so. Now, when hooked up to brain monitoring machines, we can see the frequencies change as the thoughts come into the brain from the different components. Glaser was the first to explain how this sequence worked. Now, before we go into the mental techniques of how all this works, let's go into a few of the mechanical techniques. There's a number of devices for building up the ability to tap into one's awareness and the components, but one of the simplest probably is the dowsing rod. Well, these devices simply work on an energy given off by the body to aid in the body's survival. All animal bodies have this energy radar system, and some natives can use it to pick up water and danger at great distances. Now, such aborigines do not need dowsing rods and the like. Because of their lifestyle and training, though, they're closer to civilization. And it helps some civilized humans to learn to use a dowsing rod to act as a go-between device in certain cases. It's a way to get mechanical results from our mental radar. Now, there are certain more sophisticated devices that are called radionic machine. And like all machines, though, persons will find after they use these machines for a while that they get better without the machines, using just the minds. And if they get enough practice and confidence, they can pick up this radar energy feedback automatically. Now, there are many books out on dowsing principles. The background or foundation, like the modern humans text, persons can learn to test the answers they get, to see from which sources they're from. Some answers can be invalid if the source of the data is not checked out. Well, generally speaking, learning to use and run a little simple pendulum and get yes and no answers is a great and safe way to build up our inner sensing acuity, if it's done properly with a good background. Well, generally speaking, scientific equipment will not pick up many of the kinetic energies running out of the brain, acting as radar for the human. So scientists today are often ignoring much of the evidence of the mind's role in supplying the actual radar and data to the brain. They have the equipment now, but they not only stick to their hopeless theories and limitations, they won't even put the machinery they possess to break new ground and to work in these areas. Scientists now have very sophisticated brainwave monitoring machines, and instead of being used to track down the mind's relationship with the brain, the majority of these monitors are used in hospitals or for lie detectors in other fields. Now, at least 10 million cells in the brain act as switches for the mind-control thoughts and memory retrieval actions. And these cells transfer electrical energies of various mind components. And on an EKG machine, they show up as different frequencies. Well, delta, for example, is recorded when the brain is in its restful sleep stage. And theta is a totally relaxed state. It's about 4 to 8 cycles per second. Alpha is a totally relaxed and calm mind well that runs from 8 to 13 cycles a second. And beta is 13 to 30 cycles. It shows that the priority mind is feeding in its tense, alert, anxious, striving thoughts. It's a flow of thoughts that can quickly wear down the body if it's kept up too long. Now, there are simple alpha machines which indicate when a person's slowed down this priority rate, and they're helpful to persons who can't seem to recognize what category their thought flows are working in. And hospitals use more sophisticated versions of these to monitor patients. Well, while we're on the subject, did you realize that all of the revolutionary technology is simply a crude duplicate of our body? Otto Schmidt built a simple electronic switch which imitated a nerve cell. And today, this is the foundation of computers. And TV, of course, is simply a duplication of the way the eyes work. You've all the components that will let you outperform a whole carload of the most sophisticated machinery. And now we'll go through some of these keys and help you do this. Now, one of the things to remember is that your animal body can cut off the energies going to your minds and coming from your minds. So you have to cooperate with your animal body. And one of the keys is to reward yourself and turn work into play, if at all possible. Many persons can often fit their work into a play framework and enjoy it more. If you have a particularly negative project or work, tell your body and brain component that you'll reward it if it'll help you to get the job done. And after you're done, you reward it. Reward it with a bite to eat, seeing a movie, going a ride or a walk, or any other action that's fun and not related to the work actions that you've just completed. You'll be surprised at what happens to you. Now, this sort of sounds like rewarding a child, and it is in a way, but never, never, never reward your children for learning or acting at anything. To do so, it turns play into work. It reverses the situation. And if the reward doesn't come along later after they're used to doing it, it often kills the incentive for the children to do anything anymore, unless they're rewarded. Well, think about this carefully. People make this mistake a great deal. Well, many scientists feel we're only machines and must accept our thoughts as they come. Yet this simply isn't true. Once you find out the switching sequence of the mind, you're in control. And if you have balance over your work and play, you'll get much less depressive, negative feedback. And if you'll mentally shut off all the negative inputs, you'll have proof that you, as your component and composite soul, equipped self, are in charge. And you're far more than just a machine. And at the end of this tape and video and lesson, you can try this and prove it for yourself. Well, once you get to the point that you can recognize the futility of following the usual paths of learning, education, and gaining intelligence, you can start to put into action the single most important key of all, which we mentioned before, relaxation. And unless you forget about remaining trapped as a slave in the rat race mentally, you may never tap your higher awareness. And you won't even triple your brain intelligence. You'll just remain a slave working to gain the tops and the toys and the playthings your domination masters reward you with. Well, to learn to drop out of this mental and physical conditioning for relaxation is not easy. The systems purposely keep us under pressure and stress so we can remain more subservient. Slowly and surely, though, you can become more oriented in simple pursuits of pleasure in your life, and relax in a reverential mood as often as possible. By sharing affection and pleasure with other people and other life forms, you'll make even more headway. And once you can actually relax at will, you'll be on your way to greater self-control and balance. And it is this balance that is important. You'll need to work and put effort into making a living in the mundane, cutthroat world out there, yet you should be able to switch from this stressful drive at a moment's notice and jump into your relaxation or pleasure mood. And when you're able to do this, you'll begin to see your mental blocks disappear. And as you practice taking more time out for pleasure, you can start asking for inner answers to problems, knowing that your rewarded body will now be willing to give you the answers you need. It will no longer need to withhold this data from you, because you'd only use the data to dig deeper into the rat race and priority systems. If you start rewarding it, it'll know that it'll get a reward, so it'll help you. Simple. Now, when you're in your quiet, relaxed moods, you can start practicing your tap-in procedures. You can start asking for your inner, higher-level answers and build up a flow line between your components and your brain. And probably the simplest way to start doing this is to put your questions on paper and then start answering your own questions. This starts up a sequence of request and action programming that gets results. And few persons can mentally take time out to concentrate on such questions and answers. So this forces a strong concentration by the writing action. Now, this may sound a little too simple, but I've had students who got such astonishing results from this simple action that they were dumbfounded and scared. And if you suddenly break into your high awareness too quickly for your usual logic, just relax and don't go out and do anything rash. The reason I say this is you could get yourself locked up by running off at the mouth too much about how you suddenly know so much and are reborn or whatever. Well, you've probably heard of Christians who've had this born-again experience. And what happens is they open up one of their mind components to its intelligence. And this can be dangerous if your family or friends think you've suddenly flipped out on them. If your surge of awareness brings on headaches, that's another problem. Sometimes this new flow of electrical wattage is a little bit too much. Your head is the coolant. It's a radiator for the body. And what you should do is spend a little time lying down to get your brain neurons cooled off a little bit better through this increased blood circulation. Blood is this coolant for your body, and when you really get high-level neuron activity, your neurons create excess heat. It needs to be dealt with. Now, one thing that helps to build up your neuron capacity or your brain wattage is concentration. And to concentrate, you might start out using a comfortably warm area and loose clothing, and you kind of lay off the food for a while. Keep all the hard, chaotic environmental influences away from yourself a while and totally forget your problems of the time here. Breathe deeply and slowly with your abdomen. And at first you might do this a couple of dozen times. You can get up to about 36 times ideally. Now once you relax and get some of these deep breaths pushing some of that oxygen in your system, you can settle down to recognizing that various thoughts coming into your brain are unusual, and you don't act on them, you just let them come in. You don't judge them. And pick a goal or object and direct your concentration on it then. And if it's a condition that you wish to see come about, well, visualize the way you wish it to be while you're in this relaxed mood And what happens is that your animal body usually is more willing to give you the full amount of energy it needs, and one of your minds is activated by the excess oxygen that you're taking in, and so all of this combination can double or triple, depending on how many minds you're using, your usual wattage. Average person runs on 6 to 7 watts of electricity a day. This can get it up to 12 or 15, in which you can work unusual mind over matter abilities. You get up to 20, you can do what Jesus Christ did. Very few people can do this. Now, some of the old yogas come over there to this country, and they put them on the machines, and they can balance all 3 minds. These machines show up the balance of these old mystics. Well, very few people realize it's because of the intestines intertwining that we have this generated electrical current running through the body. This energy is used by the body. It helps in keep healthy. And to keep the intestinal tract healthy, you want to have a good diet, natural fibrous foods and fruits. Now, white flour and sugar junk foods can hinder this area. A diet, we might point out, is very important for a growing brain also. Now, there are millions of feeble-minded humans on this planet who got that way because they didn't get enough animal protein and nutrition to fill in all the neuron branches. They're in the brain during the first 2 years after being born. Now, babies born from mothers with inadequate diets can be brain retarded in many cases, and families in Africa are examples of what happens to some children. Others have parents, unfortunately, that are just too plain ignorant. Well, oddly enough, it isn't the size of the brain that's important to memory. There are many examples on the books where hydrocephalics with tiny brains were honor students and above average. It's how the neurons are working and how well the minds make contact with the brain that really counts. Well, some of the world's leading thinkers once got together and stretched their mental capacity by a method that's very simple, and yet it's largely ignored today. Thomas Edison and Ford and Firestone and John Burroughs and Luther Burbank once had regular meetings where they discussed the problems in their fields, and they received back inspirational insight out of these meetings. Now, the first step to applying this group stimulation method is to focus on your goal and what you wish to know or understand. The next step is to find persons in the field or area of your interest and set up discussion groups or just casual get-togethers. Bat around your ideas with each other. Such prodding and stimulation puts your thought energy to work. You'll begin to tap your other body components that can furnish the answers. Well, most persons in the 1980s were after money. They thought money could solve all their problems. Well, the problem was that it's a very competitive field, financial field, and it's locked into rigidly controlled domination fields. And there are no ends to the gambles involved in this speculation. Usually far, far easier to gain a goal that has a reward outside the usual money system. Now, visualizing yourself in an environment you desire and being around persons already in such an environment will get much better results than just getting together with successful moneymakers. Yet, whatever ability or goal you wish can be eventually reached if it's within reason. If you research the field and get around experts in this field. Now, what happens is your inner, higher components actually exchange data with other person's components. And much of this can seep through to your intellect if you can stay relaxed and remain free of stress. So what about a memory, a good memory? Well, the world's greatest spiritual thinkers and teachers repeatedly pointed out that we're all interlinked together and can tap any knowledge on the planet that we wish. Many of them demonstrated this ability. Jesus Christ repeatedly worked miracles and could look into the thoughts of those around him. And on every continent there are traditions of similar spiritual saviors and knowledge carriers. The Americas, for example, are full of traditions about a great teacher that traveled the length and breadth of this continent long ago, teaching them that they could perform the same miracles that he did if they could really apply themselves. Well, this one word, application, is actually the key here. Ask, and ye shall receive. When we actually take the responsibility for wanting answers and act to find such answers, it triggers our high-level components. And these components go into action in the other dimensions and gain the data in a twinkling. Now, distance is no barrier, since time is not a part of the non-physical dimensions. Well, this mental commitment is usually thought of as prayer. Yet any strong mental concentration is all that's required. It makes no difference whether there are religious connotations or words involved or not. The mental order is firmly envisioned and held in the thoughts for a period. Now, these human thoughts have an energy form build-up, and the photons involved can rearrange the atom structure. And such photon energy beams can act as a sophisticated radar and gain answers in a split second, because there is one mind component that sometimes blocks the feedback of knowledge, though. Some persons have problems learning to do this. This knowledge gathering is not simple for everyone. And these persons that have problems need to learn a delayed feedback method sometimes. And for this method, you simply put a clear vision of the data you want in back of your mind, so to speak, and then you totally relax. This means clearing away all the busy thoughts and logic from your head. Breathe deeply and slowly to let the added oxygen slow down your priority thinking if it's needed. Now, eventually, you should be able to feel when the answer is coming through in segmented thoughts. Do not let the more mundane, busy work thoughts crowd out your impartial or imperishable thoughts. These inspirational thoughts will come in fleeting little momentary thoughts that are no different than any other thoughts. There's no red, white, and blue difference. You'll just have to learn the difference yourself and how you feel about it. Now, in the modern human courses, you will learn which thought comes from which mind by the content, not the shading or difference in the thought itself. And if necessary, start writing down the answer segments as they pop into your head. Now, writing forces you to slow down the priority thoughts and concentrate on the desired subjects. And the moment you start forcing this action and trying to push the action, your higher inspired knowledge will probably be cut off. So stay relaxed. Now, this writing process may take hours or days or months to get the details of a large order. And if you can get 10 minutes worth of direction in one day and only get a inspirational continuation much later, hours or days later, it'll just have to wait. If you have problems, it may be a good idea to ask your soul to direct you as to when to sit and let your flow line come through to you. You'll just be led when to do it. Sometimes your components must run around and gain the data in the physical dimension sources, and this can take a little time. Now, if it helps for you to put all this retrieval into a symbolic action, fine. Try it out. Visualize your other dimensional body gaining the knowledge you want from some distant books or points or person, and from the best brains in the field if necessary, or from the ancient Akashic Records library or in other dimensional astral legions. Whatever it takes to get your components going on the correct search for the appropriate data. And don't let fear block this action. Just remember your Creator gave you free choice, and the only thing you need to worry about is letting your negative thoughts take away your higher motivations. And if you use your data and abilities to dominate or use and control others, you can be quickly cut off and attacked by others with the same motivation. But as long as you follow the golden rule and grant others their choice, you can ask for instant aid and defense against any negativity that you might come up against. Well, these negative thoughts, for example, can suddenly come through to your brain and stop your flow line or intuition. In such a case, you can instantly put out a mental order commanding these negative outside thoughts to leave. Now, in a split second, you can find your thoughts back into the relaxed, enjoyable dwell again. Now, in other presentations and texts, we go into great detail on using your astonishing, powerful self-defense energies. And once you understand your rights and potentials, you're virtually free of all outside mental and physical attacks and dangers. Now, other than a few little technical difficulties and hurdles like the things we've just mentioned, high-level data gathering secrets are simple. People just need to get into a relaxed dwell and mentally order what they desire. If you want a good memory, just pay attention to what subject that you want to remember and request your higher level components to remember the data. Simple. Your body has little need to remember, though, most of the things that pass before you. Remembering all these details is foolish. It would be bogged down in just trivia. Now, what you can do is put a simple mental request in when you run across things that you really think are important to remember. Well, you can read stacks of books on memory and mind psychology, and the majority will be of almost no value because the writers had no idea of how the human components work and how to get their cooperation. For example, the majority of experts still classify the hidden personality of the human into the conscious and the subconscious. And this concept is simply too shallow to get any high-level results. Sure, it may be enough to prod you into believing in your ability just a little bit more, yet who has the time to read through stacks of books full of I believe in miracles simply don't work for persons who stay in a priority mind dwell. Such persons work strictly on logic, and to them, miracles aren't logical. Okay, great. You're a skeptic. Well, what you can do is go out and spend $100 on a course on memory or mind power. If it's a memory course, it may cover 1,000 examples of a revolutionary method based on body action symbolism. For example, next time you want to recall something, the course will tell you to cross your finger or your toe while you're putting in a mental order to remember this data. This profound methodology is actually successful for government organizations like the CIA who teach such data in courses to their personnel. Now, of course, the experts don't know why such methods work. They have nice theories, but people who spend the $100 put that much value on the system and so it works. But actually, why it works is simpler. Your animal body is usually sick and tired of your supercilious minds running you and not giving it so much say-so as hi or kiss my foot or anything else, and without pleasure and decisions over the body activities. So by getting the body to take a little part in this memorizing process, the body is happier and it's more cooperative. And that's so very, very simple. When the minds are cooperative, the brain will provide the brain energy for the memory, and the minds can store up the memory energy when they're furnished this energy. Now when retrieval time comes, you can cross your fingers again, and presto, you remember. The body sees now that it still has control and a mutual request, and so it allows the energy and memory retrieval that you need. And presto, you have a great memory, and all it takes is just crossing your fingers at the right time. Well, because there's usually not much reward for the body in remembering where everything is, one of the easiest ways of gaining such a location memory is to put things in the same place every time. Don't just set facts and objects around at random. And when you put something in a new place, tell yourself several times that this is where it's going to be, all the while visualizing the item and the place. Well, mindless action and behavior is action that is just floating along with no commitments or concentration, like animals do, on brain action alone. And when you want to remember, you must put in a solid, attentive mind order. It is only the minds that remember, and this is a secret that very few persons on this planet know. And now you know it. Well, I should suppose that about 90% of the books on memory and mind power are almost worthless because the average person won't make the commitment and responsibility with the thought of action, even if there was good information in them. Well, most of we humans are trapped in mundane jobs up to our neck in work, and while we have a great admiration for people making big money and such, we will not make the necessary action to follow their example in most cases. We all want something that forces us to instant riches, to be famous and talented with no effort. Well, now you know that precise visualization and actions are necessary. With the deeper foundation keys that you're getting here, you can be a genius. And if you're not, it simply means you haven't made the effort and spent enough time working at it. Well, because there's so many myths about memory, let's explode some of the favorites. First, age has nothing to do with mind activity or ability. There may be more stored in the memory tapes, but retrieval is the same at any age. The only problem that can arise is the blockage of neuron data retrieval, and this can come from a lack of amino acids in the neuron synapse points. As long as you remain healthy on a decent diet and get some animal protein and meat to keep up your amino acid intake, you'll usually be safe. Now, choline and certain trace elements can come from a normal diet, and when persons go on a strictly rice or vegetables without any animal proteins, we can have problems in learning and retrieval sluggishness. Now, panic and stress, as we keep pointing out, often affect memory. So relax. Force your mind to slow down before it ruins your life or kills you. Now, many memory experts, like the famous Harry Lorraine, use word associations. They turn a name into a ridiculous visual picture or try to tie the new data into the old, remembered data. A new Betty, for example, would be linked to an old Betty that you already know. Now, a Mr. Muscleman would be symbolized by a muscular man, for instance. And such word associations work well for some persons. And you can use these techniques if they work for you. Just keep in mind that these word association games are not actually needed if you can get cooperation between your different components. Actually, we have everything we've ever done in our whole history on tape in our head, or our mind component storage banks. These storage banks are not in the brain. The brain is only a switch box. The big fuss over the left and right brain thinking is actually meaningless. The brain can be half gone, and the memory is still able to get through just fine. And hundreds of cases of persons with brain injuries recovering are proof of this point. The brain can be rerouted, can reroute the mind input circuits and still retain its original potentials. And some of this internal rerouting may take time, but this is true of any body recovery. Well, because the body is naturally seeking pleasure, it's often easy to dredge up pleasurable memories for happy people. You can see happy people around you that are enjoyable. Well, what happens is that many people have bad experiences, and so a few of these experiences and people become negative. Many of them are negative and suspicious and unhappy, and they're prone to dredge up only negative memories. The animal body is not concerned or happy about remembering, but the minds keep dredging these thoughts up. So what happens is a lot of times the soul erases these bad memories. And the bad traumatic experiences from day to day are often erased completely from the external sensor grids of the body. Well, these external grids are in the eyes and ears. And you can look at or hear something, and if your body does not think it's of enough value to record it, it will never get into your sensor grids. And a lot of people, unfortunately, have let a lot of these things through, and it's affected their lives, and it's made them very negative. And they drag other people around down into this negativity. So after a while, the body cuts off more and more information that comes into you, because a lot of it is negative. And why should the body collect negative information? That's why it's important to ask to remember a piece of information, just as if you're speaking mentally with another you. You can think of yourself as several separate components and gain a better insight into balancing yourself for peak body performance. And if you ever doubt that you're separate components, look at what you do when your body is hypnotized. You can perform stupid acts while your mind thoughts are fussing with their thoughts of how dumb this act is. Why am I doing this? And why can't I stop? Well, your minds are not you. You are a composite of components. And the so-called mind experts haven't really pieced all of this together yet. Well, a number of people find it almost impossible to balance their components, and they won't make the efforts to do so. So they have to use little tricks. And there are many tricks, many ways of tricking the little animal. And putting together chunks of information and data to aid memory is an old trick. A license plate with CNU can be turned into a canoe. The desire for the plate data will bring on a mental picture of that canoe. The letters BASN can turn into "Be a soldier now" sentence. Now, to remember to set your clock back for daylight savings, you could use the phrase, "spring ahead, fall back." Now, such associative memories and methods can be used as steps to building up confidence. And once you get yourself going in a direction of pleasure and enjoyment, your natural abilities will come into play more and more. And persons who lose their enjoyments and curiosity and goals slowly lose their abilities. And that, friends, is sad. Look around you at all the people who are being shut off, or shutting themselves off. After all, why should the body keep things running at full bore when you only hold back its natural pleasures and fun? Well, your mind thoughts can kill you, can kill your health and your mental ability if they don't allow a balance for the body. Well, we're frequently asked about hypnosis and subliminal information implantation and a few other tricky machine methods of gaining a better memory. And as we pointed out, we'd go crazy if we remembered all the things that flow in front of us constantly. And the ear and eye grids filter out most of this data. They feel isn't useful to our survival. It hasn't been too long that science has known about these. And our minds, having a different idea as to what's important, frequently aren't too happy about the body's censorship. They invent ways to force the body to retain or gain data. And that's what hypnosis and these things do. It's a force-feeding method. Now, sand patterns can be fed into the ears that force the body into a mental dwell with machines. And the neurophone and similar conditioners and entraining machines can force this information in the body. Only to a point, however. It can trick the only once, and the body will never be tricked again. And sometimes the body doesn't get any reward, and it'll even cut these things off. And unfortunately, hypnosis lowers the ability to set up blocks against mind conditioning by others, and it weakens the natural defense system of the body. And it's very dangerous in this way. Now, in the present society, most of us have too many strings running to us now. We have too many thought implant sources coming at us, and hypnosis is very, very strong and not suggested at all. And all these tools and crutches are only stopgaps to learning to balance the body components mentally and gain the same objectives without this force or trickery. After all, why should you depend on a machine when all you need to do is learn a little self-control and knowledge of how your circuits truly function? For this high-level understanding, the modern human courses are available. Let's touch on memory codes a little. Humans think in pictures, and memory experts use crazy, zany pictures as a rule to remember things. For some reason, we tend to remember the crazy, exotic pictures much easier. The more absurd and violent, the better as a rule. Now, if you want to remember a car, for example, you can visualize a gaudy, huge, noisy, or hot rod auto zooming past everyone else or whatever. And you'll probably remember it this way. And since numbers are rather dull, experts often swap numbers for letters and sounds. Now, 7 may be represented as a K or a hard C sound. And anytime you want to remember the 7, you repeat a little cat or similar word. Now tied in with a witty picture or saying, if there are several letters. And if you wish a code system for this type of memory retrieval technique, drop us a stamped envelope and I'll send you one free, or simply stop this tape and view this code more closely and jot it down if necessary. And there are inexpensive books at libraries that detail the use of these code systems. And remember, though, you won't need any code systems or crutches if you get all your components working together, as we keep pointing out. The components that have your memory tapes give you the memory pictures you need automatically if you get in balance. Now let's detail this code system a little more deeply. To aid in making a picture out of numbers, you turn every number into a sound, and then make words of the objects with the sounds. Now, a typical number sound code is 1 is the T or D sound. 2 is the N sound. 3 is the M sound. 4 is the R sound. 5, the L sound. And 6 is the sh or ch sound, or soft G or J sound. And 7 is the K hard or C or hard G sound. And 8 is the F or V sound. 9, the B or P sound. And O is the S or Z sound. Now, using something like a regular rock sitting next to Jill would be a picture spelling out 440216. Regular rock sitting next to Jill. RRSNTJ. 440216. So all you have to do is remember the code. Very simple, very effective once you memorize the code. Now, in the 80s, there are a number of educators that are pointing out that the educational system is failing. It's full of kids with no self-control and very little interest in learning. Some of them say as high as 25% of the population in school should be given only a very basic education and turned loose to the trade schools and jobs that they can handle. If they can stay in school, they hold the rest of the students back in the grades that they're in. Now, even in countries as backward as Russia, most students that can move ahead faster are allowed to do so, not dragging the other students back. And this is one of the problems today in our school systems. Students who have greater potentials are held back so long that they finally get bored and get in a rut. Well, by allowing students to get into areas they enjoy and eliminating all the boring, unnecessary work, we get better thinkers. The Creator, you'll remember, actually designed everyone differently so that there are people who enjoy doing virtually everything that needs to be done in a civilization. Once the basic foundations are laid, it's only necessary to help persons find their particular talents and fields. Now, if the animal self is restricted and hounded too early away from such goals as pleasure and enjoyment, it starts putting up blocks and resistance. It starts rebelling against the systems that the minds force on it. And this lowers the intelligence potential. Well, catching kids before they're too bored with school or have been put down too many times for being stupid in their particular field is the most vital thing that a parent can do to raise their intellect and keep their intellect high. And they should always be surrounded with the best books and all kinds of reading material and the most intellectual people that you can find for them to be around, however you can do it. Well, in the present time, both teenagers and adults are particularly prone to rely on drugs to switch over their various mind components. Well, all through history, drugs and alcohol have been used as a pick-me-up over misery created by domination and negative circumstances. Yet the pressures of the present are particularly oppressive. Adults pay almost double the tax of serfs who toiled under the king. And even women today are required to work for family survival. The children are restricted at every turn and have little to do. Peer pressures are high, so it's little wonder that drugs are so popular today. Now, if most persons only knew that they could get high naturally or block out negative thoughts and depressions mentally, the situation could change. No branch of science seems to have the slightest concept of how to deal with these problems, though. The younger persons who really become alienated with the system and rebel are often kept under heavy sedation by society, or they're drinking heavily. They're locked in institutions and tranquilized right out of their priority-based mind. Now, most of the pills used in institutions today that are tranquilizers have but one purpose, and that is to block out the higher minds, leave the simpler animal mind level state. And 5 years on marijuana and a dozen acid trips, and many humans are this way all the time. They don't worry about being under great stress or ever competing again. Their minds are permanently affected. And how this works in the case of lysergic acid is simple. Lysergic acid eats away, corrodes the neurons under the synapse points of the brain until there's a sudden surge of current, just like a photographic flash bulb burns out, so that there are certain parts of the brain burned out, where the mind action cannot come through to the brain as normal again. And sometimes this is permanent. In a few cases, it takes years to get back to normal. Marijuana is another supposedly innocent drug that affects the brain neurons to the degree after several years that the brain can no longer function as normal, and the wattage necessary will never be gained till there's a complete clean out of the system. And we'll go into this a little bit later here. Now, other drugs like angel dust also act like lysergic acid. They can burn out the neurons. And unlike marijuana, there's no choice. The person burns out and they have no choice because they did not know what they were doing to themselves. So there should be some very, very heavy fines and sentences against persons who are pushing these heavy drugs, dangerous drugs, because no one who is going to have high-level intelligence can do so once they've burned out their neurons without years of clean-out or miraculous healing, which is a subject we won't go into here. Now, aside from keeping drugs out of the system, we need to keep good nutritional trace elements in the system. And since the land is leached of the light trace elements and minerals over much of this nation's farm belts, most of the food we get is deficient in its nutritional value. Now, if the light metals like zinc and lithium and such are washed out to the ocean and not in the land, they're not in the vegetables that you eat. And since the neurons require these metals underneath the synapse points, sooner or later people have problems unless they get these elements from someplace. And this is why an extra nutritional diet is usually necessary now, not all cases. Now, vegetables grown in today's large corporate farms may look good, but if they're hybrids, they may contain only half as much nutrient and nutritional value. It may be almost lacking in the trace elements. Now, it's a virtual must for persons under the usual stress of civilization to have a program of extra food supplements, because many of the usual vitamins and minerals and such are lost through stress and strain. Now, vitamin C and the usual multivitamins and minerals are not that expensive. They should probably be taken with some vitamin E or raw seeds, which have the E and F in them naturally. Nutritionists usually recognize that the B vitamins work wonders on stress and are indicated for person in the rat race, as well as other nutritional substances. And the reason that they work is that they affect the oxygen-based body components, and this subject is virtually unknown outside of the modern human texts. Well, fresh juices, of course, are probably 50 times more nutritional and vitamin-loaded than the reconstituted juices that we find now in all of today's supermarkets and stores. And if we have a well-balanced diet with all these elements and extras we add to our diet, it can raise the IQ considerably over a little time period. Now, after a number of years, our veins clog up, usually with a number of contaminants and gunk, and if we can chelate this gunk out of our veins and stay on a good diet, learning can come easily if the stress can be kept down afterward. And choline and lecithin and a number of other chelation vitamin compounds are typical of chelation agents that are oral and do work up to a point. We'll cover this a little more deeply later. Now, none of these opinions should be taken as health advice in your situation, of course. If you have a health problem, we recommend that you consult a physician. Well, in the 1980s, a number of tests showed that when the bloodstream got any sizable amount of carbon dioxide in it, the arteries to the brain and the rest of the body would widen to get the normal amount of oxygen to the cells. Well, many felt the occasional breathing of carbon dioxide then was felt to be beneficial and to sometimes aid in a permanent enlargement of the arteries if continued periodically. And actually no aspirator or respirator is needed. Men could just lay down with a hat over their face to get this same action, and women could rebreathe their breath for 30 seconds every few hours using a paper bag or a plastic bag, a baggies. And done every time a work break came up, some persons have felt that this was a very useful practice for increasing the brain's blood supply. Now, carbon dioxide, of course, can kill you if it's overdone, but just a little bit is considered healthful and useful. As to drug elimination, which we mentioned earlier, vitamin B6 is a very useful dietary additive because it tends to increase the oxygen supply in the bloodstream and reduces the negative effects of stress. So persons who can't afford the chelation therapy would be encouraged to take vitamin C and hot sweat baths, especially for running out poisons and running out drugs from the system. You know, persons who've corroded their brain neuron endings can soak for probably 2 weeks in 105-degree temperature hot tubs. You should sweat or soak for an hour or so, this 105, to eliminate these toxins and gunk in the system. And it should be kept up for at least 2 weeks, more if there's a heavy problem. And niacin is in a large enough dose will bring on a natural flushing action which carries off contaminations as the blood vessels dilate. And this is a non-prescription item, very easily obtainable. And this, along with B6 and heavy sweating, are the 3 therapies that could be used for undoing a lot of the drug and chemical damage, which virtually all of us have been having to some degree. Now, the reason we mention these therapies is that obviously by increasing the blood flow to the brain, the intelligence automatically raises, increases. So one of the single most important secrets to increased intelligence in some cases is very simple: nutritional and artery cleansing practices. Keeping our arteries clean in this society is not easy. Everywhere we turn, we're faced with food and stress, which clogs up our arteries and eventually chokes down the blood flow. Well, there are virtually dozens of additives and processes which bring on a buildup of plaque on the artery walls. And the better known culprit is fat. We civilized people love to eat fats and greases of almost every nature, even after we know better. We should have known better for a couple of thousand years, because Christians conveniently forget that Moses told his followers to stay away from fat, especially pork fat. There have been studies that have actually shown that other unclean food also affects the human body in a detrimental way. Now, the uric acid, for instance, in clams and other unclean food has been found to irritate many arthritic-prone people. There are bodybuilding experts that claim that pork is very damaging to their trainees, and they keep them off pork strictly. Well, trichinosis and the little trichina and her young here in this picture are what the problem are with pork and bears and different meats like this, unclean meats. According to this author, there are hundreds of thousands that die yearly of worm infestations each year, when the death certificate simply lists the death as heart failure. Many experts know of this and usually fail to get into it because there are a lot of vested interests here. Well, diet then is very important to keep the bloodstream clear, and few persons are free of restricted clogged up arteries today, and this is something you might look into that we just don't have time for in this presentation. Well, one of the all-time favorite methods of attaining a state of relaxation and peace in the face of chaotic outside conditions was deep and rhythmic breathing. In various Oriental texts, thousands of years old, recommended certain rhythmic breathing exercises for maintaining health and mental acuity. Well, most of us have heard of the yogas and Eastern mystics who've learned this breath control and are sometimes able to control their heart and pulse rate and generally regulate almost any part of their body through this mind action. Well, there are many variations on these yogi exercises, but generally speaking, you can get good results from simply breathing in a little more deeply than normal and then exhaling slowly using the diaphragm action of the belly area. And what this does is to start up one or more of the positive mind components, building up extra chi or oxygen-based energy. And it also oxygenates the system and opens up the air passages of the lungs for better circulation. Now this oxygen is what the yogas use in their acupuncture, in the chi system and the acupuncture meridians, as they call it. Now sometimes the yogas will close the right nostril off and take a deep, relaxed breath. And then they'll switch nostrils, and this is slightly more effective in running this chi through the system. And this is a system and a circuit that science knows almost nothing about today, even though it's a couple of thousand years old, and Chinese records on this acupuncture oxygen circuit go back thousands of years, which might tell you something about today's theories. Well, let's touch on outside factors that can affect our mental acuity. We're all aware of the many techniques of mind control that are being increasingly used to modify the radical elements of society today. Now, I've seen some of my friends go in mental hospitals and come out never being the same again, never having their mental acuity again. And typical of many of these techniques are used are prisoners who don't act the subservient role to their superiors. And a lot of them are immediately shot with a drug called anectine, and they have a complete body paralysis, and are driven to acute fear, just as in the former electroshock treatments. And with this terrorizing weapon and fear, the rebels soon knuckle under. And such behavior modification methods have been around about 50,000 inmates in hospitals in the last few years, according to the mental health experts. Well, Sam Ervin, the former senator, found numerous government-financed experiments to control people through drugs and computers and brain surgery and other means. And since renegades cause trouble and persons in prison can cost a good 100,000 for 20-year stretch, it's simply a case of valid preventative maintenance to many experts. And yet there's a fine line between present methods and methods used by the domination systems created by Hitler and communism and 1,000 tyrant governments before. And when you read the flowery sensationalistic ads about what self-hypnosis or subliminal mind control tapes do to raise your IQ or ability, think twice. As this is another subject that can creep up on America, creep up on us. There are hundreds of thousands of people across our country that are buying these tapes and using them and breaking down their natural defense against further domination. Now, by self-hypnosis or subliminal mind control, you can raise your IQ, or you can stop your desire to eat, drink, or almost anything else, according to the people that are selling them. But the problem is, each time that you allow any outside influence beyond your own mental choice to influence you, your self-protection walls grow a little bit weaker. Now, in time and under repeated usage, the most innocent-sounding self-help tape can put you into condition where you're a little more easily influenced by any outside alien influence. Now, this insidious erosion and danger is seldom recognized, and it's one reason that persons who live in front of a TV set are molded into perfect, pliable, agreeable citizens. They've simply lost their acute choice sense and become more or less sheep to the system. They're working in harness and staying in debt. Well, humans that are living with strict control over them through various fears are usually limited mentally also, and they're afraid of losing their few securities. Too afraid to rock the boat or stand up for their rights, and this is what's occurred in the United States to a large degree today. 50 years ago, a man could support his family and buy a house and save enough for retirement. Well, today it's different. Both parents must work, and the house will usually never be paid for. The Social Security pittance is about the best that most persons can look forward to now. Under this pressure, few Americans can learn to think and act for themselves anymore to the degree that they once did. They're simply too busy working in the rat race after they go through the farce of public education. Well, as Americans fail to compete with the mentality and brains of the Orientals, we're quickly losing our industrial and technological superiority. Slowly and surely, we're being allowed to be turned into the same mentally dominated species that inhabit most of the rest of the world. Well, our forefathers escaped to America to get away from repressive domination systems. Now, we Americans don't even make the effort to keep our freedoms that we so dearly won, and each year, more of our few remaining constitutional rights are eroded away, and very few take action to stop it. Each year, we allow our children to graduate with less education and ability, and the few who do rebel and try to teach their own children are quickly regulated and governed out of their resistance. Well, what have we Americans done with our heritage is probably the question that we should ask, because we started out with a free choice constitution, and we've wound up now with most of it gone, 80% of it gone. We still have an easy life because of technology, but we're paying more taxes and under more repression than ever before in history. And we're probably better off than the rest of the world, but we have so much potential that's a shame to lose it. And if you're under stress, you might think about this, because this is one of the things that your children will be living with unless we change it. And there are many ways to change this, and we go into this in other presentations. Well, Gene Matlock is a teacher and writer and publisher that wrote a great book on increasing brain power in the 80s, and in his work he pointed out that in schools like the Beverly Hills High School, there's virtually no heavy discipline, as in most other schools across the nation. And without this ingrained fear and control elements, these students grow up with outstanding scholastic ability and become the future masters of the country and the nation's trends and entertainment especially. And training slaves requires discipline and fear, and when both are not creating stress on the body, and the brain can learn and function naturally and easily. And any time students are under a great deal of pressure can cause a trauma and backlash that'll keep them at a slavery level the rest of their lives in some cases. Well, total relaxation and reverence is the greatest panacea for the shortcomings and ills of man in existence, Matlock contends, and I agree. And this is the way we wipe out cases like this, where there is something in the background that's blocked an individual most of his life from some early trauma. As I point out, the little-known secret of simply switching off the mind component that caused this stress was unavailable and hidden a few years ago. But now these shortcomings and situations have changed with the advent of the modern human texts. It's not hard to recognize that the Earth's civilization have had chaos and ignorance for thousands of years now due to the shortcomings of the people. There have always been leaders that are unscrupulous enough to take advantage of people with poor ethics and values. The majority of persons probably remain in ignorance and subjugation because they're simply too lazy and slow to pull themselves out of their mental slavery. Each person has at least one inner non-material component. Now, this component's been on this planet gathering information for thousands of years now. And this component has learned what it feels like to be abused and used. And it records this data and feeds it to us whenever we need to make a choice or a decision. Each person inwardly knows what is right from wrong then. We know that it's wrong to lie and steal and cheat. And yet many of us continually deny our inner awareness and follow the negative programming fed to us by one of our reflection or domination-oriented components. Well, this drive towards self-control of our baser nature is a process that could be called the schoolroom of life then. It's a situation where we remain in chaos and misery until we start knowing ourselves and making correct, intelligent decisions. Well, earlier in this program we discussed a few mental manifestation techniques. Now that we have more background, let's go more deeply into this. If you desire something as simple as a hammer, you may get fast action and run across a discarded hammer in a few days if you put your mental order in. If you desire a simple residence in the country, you may suddenly get an offer to be a caretaker or to caretake someone's country cabin for a period. Such things can be used and run across without all of the money that most people think is necessary for everything now. Now, a big order like this may take a little more time because it's a little more complex. And in either case, actual money is often not involved or necessary. Now, putting in orders for specific people or specific other life forms is usually a waste of time simply because such mental orders require the approval of the other life forms. And persons who use undue mental coercion on other humans toward their own selfish desires are inviting trouble, because such domination actions bring on a condition of what Easterners call karma. Now, under karma, such persons usually have someone else manipulate or abuse them in some manner, as they dominated the other person. And under present manifestation laws, such rebound karma will usually come back in a matter of weeks or months. Now, putting in mental orders will get similar results without so much visualization being necessary here, and this art requires a knowingness within that such ability is available and workable. And beginners at this art usually run into problems when they put in a sloppy, poorly thought out order. They'll tend to put in orders for things which they think they want, but which they don't really like or enjoy after they receive them. And such desires are built up by salesmen. They're artificial, and they soon lead to more responsibility and problems as a rule. A carefully thought out mental order will usually be beneficial to everyone involved, and if it involves another person, it'll hinge on their mutual choice in the action. And it's usually much wiser, for example, to put an order in for someone who can share pleasure and affection, rather than someone with certain physical attributes. Well, the fact is that most people are putting in orders all the time in a weak way, daydreaming around about what they want, and usually this is completely unrecognized by most of these people. A whimsical order of a year past is seldom recognized when chance circumstances bring it to the present. A hasty order for someone to love may be brought to fruition in the form of a baby to babysit with, rather than a handsome lover if it's a sloppy order here. So keep some of these things in mind as you mentally visualize pictures and put in your mental orders for things. It's part of the mind action. It brings greater intelligence, and as you get greater intelligence, these mental orders come to fruition much, much more quickly. Your wattage increases. And this is a subject we touch on in other discourses. Well, after the many comments that we usually make, I usually hear people say, well, what can I do about it? Things are in such a mess. But there are systems that are available, as I said before, that can change this planet, and let's look at one. Now, under democracies and republics like ours, the name of the game is supplying a product. And to gain the units of value called money in these societies, we simply must supply something that other people, persons, require. Now, if we're smart enough to figure out a way to supply something to a large number of people, we can get a large number of credit units back, or money. And if you only fill the need of a few persons, you only gain a few units of value. Now, up to now, such systems have been pretty successful because they rewarded persons who were willing to be industrious. As governments have become top-heavy with non-producers, however, the taxes and restrictive legislation have tended to work against producers until the incentives are weak and the restrictions are strong. At present, the non-incentive socialistic systems are falling apart just as fast as our corrupted free choice and free market systems. And in the next 20 years, the only alternative to a collapse of all the present systems is a new system. Well, the system whose time has come could be called a guaranteed life support system. And such a name may cause a tender spot in our values for a moment here, but only because the idea is new, and the promise has been long used by frauds. Well, when we consider that our Creator gave us this planet just covered with all the food and raw material and potentials that we could ever use, why should we always need to go through the greedy, top-heavy denial systems and governments to receive our natural heritage? Think about it. For the first time in thousands of years now, we have the technology and the distribution potentials for a literal paradise on this planet. The trick is in cutting off all the control agents who've been used to being rewarded by pushing paper and producing nothing. And this is done simply by doing away with the need for war and denial systems through supplying all persons with a simple guaranteed minimum survival security. Well, the money that's now being used to perpetuate war-based economic systems could easily support such a plan, and the transition would be very simple in all governments. And make no mistake, though, this is a far cry from socialism or communism, which are only dictatorships with an idealistic facade. This simple system could function through basic money credits that would be only used to supply the basic shelter, food, and medical care. Now, a separate money could be in use to be used by persons who wished more than the basic subsistence level existence. The go-getters could still have their incentives and wealth, but there'd be no need for the haves and the have-nots to be at war with one another for survival motivations. Could be smoothly performed in all present governments, and the large majority of persons would put out as much as they do at present, simply because they'd have to be doing what they wish to do by choice, not because they had to survive as at present. Well, as we go further into turmoil and hard times through the present defective denial systems, there will be a stronger desire to see more survival assurance from the present system. And while persons with little reality may tend to write off the whole show and dream of their paradise somewhere in the hereafter, they might well do ponder what's contained in the Lord's Prayer. It spoke of making our paradise here on this planet. Now, it should seem logical to assume that unless we humans can learn to run things right on this real estate, we certainly won't be given any more somewhere else. And more details on this remarkable guaranteed life support system can be sent to persons that are willing to donate some postage costs. This system worked for a short time by A.B. Glaser, who put it in effect after World War II in his area of Germany. It worked for months, beautifully. All the people were working just the same as they were before. Well, most of us realize by now that our country is being quickly contaminated with many, many contaminants like metal. And these heavy metals get in the food and they clog up the veins, and this stops the circulation of the blood, slows it down, and this leads to mental problems, mental deficiency, a lack of mental acuity. And so we're going to cover this a little more deeply. We're going to cover chelation. And Rudolf Asleben, M.D., had a clinic in Los Angeles, California a few years back that treated thousands of patients with EDTA and chelation therapy. Well, hundreds of patients that came into Asleben's clinic had lead poisoning, believe it or not. And in the last few years, we're burning over 100 billion gallons of gasoline in this country. And this contains a great deal of lead. And according to Asleben, the heavy metals destroy brain and nerve cells. And they inhibit enzymes and result in depressed chemical reactions that result in lowered energy, and missing amino acids and reduced hormones, and they encourage the transmutation of other elements into themselves and increase the level of toxicity and are present every bite we eat, every drink we swallow, and every breath we breathe, he maintains. And there's no way to avoid them. The only way to remove or reduce them in body tissue is the EDTA therapy, the chelation therapy. Now, Asleben maintains when you get lead in your system, in the nerves and the brain tissue, you can experience irritability, insomnia, or difficult sleeping, headaches, light headaches, and dizziness. And And as the condition gets worse, there may be a fine twitching of the face and eyelid muscles and a slight trembling of the hands and fingers, and fast reflexes followed by slow reflexes. Later, as it gets worse, a tingling and numbness, nerve paralysis, disruption of major nerve center in the brain, and the voice changes, swallowing difficulties, vision problems, breathing problems, stomach disorders, hearing changes, balance disturbances, neck and muscle pains, and when the muscles are involved, muscle joint pains, muscle discomfort. Often a metallic taste in the mouth. The tongue becomes coated. Aches and pains all over the body. Colic, even blood in the stool sometimes. Well, this lead poisoning is epidemic in California and cities like New York. There's a Gwinny, director of New York City Bureau of Lead Poisoning, that tested some few years ago, last test that I know about, found thousands of heavily contaminated individuals requiring drastic therapy. Now, Ausleben maintains that he can have the lead excreted through the kidneys by as much as 300% with just a one injection of EDTA. EDTA is an artificial calcium that grabs all the gunk from the walls of the arteries and flushes it through the kidneys. And he considers persons with lead poisoning should do this several times a year if they live in the cities. He says, first of all, stay out of stop and go traffic and keep away from the streets where this lead is coming out through the exhausts. Don't use regular water, use distilled water. Have your blood checked for lead every once in a while. If you have more than 10 micrograms percent, start doing something about it. The symptoms are achy and heartburn and mentally sluggish and tireder than usual, irritability, dizziness. Now, Ausleben started testing people for mercury back in the 60s. He found that 92% of the persons that came through his door had mercury poisoning, and 89 had lead poisoning, 85% had arsenic poisoning, and this was getting worse the last time that I heard from him. Now, mercury poisoning causes a change in vision, behavioral changes, insomnia, trembling, sore throat, chills, vomiting, stomach pains, mental disturbance, paralysis, numbness, loss of appetite, urinary problems, high blood pressures, and in many cases, the symptoms of hypoglycemia, almost indistinguishable from hypoglycemia, and affects the heart and the skeletal muscles and the brain, knocks the intelligence way down, brings on hacking cough sometime, and nausea and headaches and chills and fever, aches, pain in the extremities. Think of it. 92% of the people he tested had mercury poisoning, whether they were sick or well. Ausleben explained that there are health catastrophes going on in our country, and the health catastrophes are the heart attack patients, and the insecticide poisoning, and nerve degeneration, and biochemical disasters. And most of these are caused by the buildup of lead, mercury, arsenic, cadmium, nickel, and insecticide poisoning, plus the gunk in the arteries. And he's easily removing all of this with the EDTA formulas. He also treating with almost 90% effectiveness, hypoglycemia and disorders of the brain and eye and multiple sclerosis, alcoholism, and various other degenerative diseases. Now, in the beginning of this presentation, we mentioned that pills are unnecessary for memory and increasing intelligence if a person could live a stress-free life and stay away from chemicals. And unfortunately, many persons are so deep in responsibility it's almost impossible to back out of the rat race and relax. And for such persons, pills may be one of the few salvations if they can't get away out of the responsibilities. And we've taken a certain look at nutritional aids to keep the body humming, and under a heavy stress load, such as oral chelation agents, can be of value to prevent worse things and a worsening of the situation. But they'll seldom clear up the badly clogged arteries. And for cleaning out such clogged arteries, there's the EDTA that you see here. And there are many clinics. Halstead Clinic in Colton, California is a current one of the largest clinics in the western United States. Osleben's office was near Disneyland in Anaheim, and whether it's still there or not, I do not know when you see this. Now, clinics across the country are having amazing results with patients who regain their mental acuity and their health after a series of treatments. The treatments run several $1,000s. They're $60 for a single treatment, generally speaking, at this time. And this is a much, much cheaper way to go than a $25,000 bypass operation for the heart. Well, chelation is one of the major medical breakthroughs of the 20th century, so look into it. Clean yourself out, get your brain working, get the oxygen and blood to your head again. Herbs have been long used, and I'm asked about herbs quite frequently, and they're used in Asia a lot for aiding memory and mental acuity. And gotu kola and periwinkle, spirulina and nasturtium and rosemary, cayenne and blueberry are examples in some of the formulas. And herbs usually supply a missing element to the synapse points of the brain, and others have other benefits, but this is too long to cover here. Now, there are other simple naturals. There are eggs, for instance, that contain a substance called active lipid that reverses brain aging, according to the various medical school studies. And an egg a day is very important for mental acuity in your later years. Now, there are many, many formulations of mental memory drugs, big breakthroughs. One of them was Psi-Alert a few years ago, in the 60s. It was a possible miracle memory drug that came out. It's been unobtainable since then, but it's made from magnesium hydroxide and pimoline, if you can round these substances up. And a similar memory drug is Hydrogena. And Hydrogena is available. It's made by Sandoz in this country. And this substance actuates the memory to a different degree in different persons. And it's generally available at less than $1 a tablet, either in this country or below the border in Mexico. I have acquaintances that use it and swear by it. Very impressed with its actions. But it is expensive, and you shouldn't need it if you get rid of the stress and clean your veins out. PRL 853 was another wonder brain booster. It was outstanding memory drug in the original test. It was developed by Pacific Research Labs in San Diego. And it was an amazing memory stimulator. You might be able to locate it somewhere. A choline, which we mentioned before, has been shown to make persons up to 25% smarter. And choline is found naturally in liver, beans, seeds, corn, eggs, yeast, whole grains, beef, and fish. Or you can buy it in a can in the health food store and use it regularly and faithfully. You can't just use it once a month and expect any good from it. And as we've mentioned also, many of these drugs and herbs and pills simply supply a missing element in the diet. And boost the brain power by getting the brain working back at normal again. It isn't that it boosts the memory so much as it just gets the body working again. And with, as I said, the trace elements out of the soil, this isn't very hard to do if you get some trace elements in your diet. Now, choline is obtainable in virtually any health food store in the country, and many drugstores. Very easy, very cheap. Well, these are oral chelation tablets. Now, these oral chelation tablets contain choline and many of the trace elements like copper, chromium, iron, plus the potassium, cysteine, magnesium, thiamine, adrenal, dicalcium, and calcium, and many of the vitamins. And this is something that almost anyone in contaminated areas should be taking. These are $50 a bottle, just roughly. And they're a multivitamin, multi-mineral with many of the chelation substances in it also. Now, many physicians are recommending these oral chelation tablets, like Dr. Donsbach of Southern California, that feel that this will keep you on an even keel where you will not continue to get lead poisoning and the various heavy metal contaminations. It's enough to throw them off. It's not usually enough to clean out the arterial system, get rid of the gunk, but it will continue to protect you from getting more arterial damage, according to people like Donsbach. This is very important, to keep that blood running to your head, those arteries open. Now, also keep in mind that many preservatives and additives have been found to affect learning ability and memory. Sodium nitrite is a culprit, a good example, which is in many prepared meats. Now, probably over 50% of the people in this country have certain allergies that they're not even aware of. Now, persons with bad allergies have a learning problem. And the way to test for an allergy is very simple. You simply take your pulse before and after eating one substance. If your pulse raises 6 beats a minute, then the chances are good that you're allergic to the substance after eating it. Now, one by one, you can track down the substances in your diet that you're allergic to, and you'll find yourself feeling much, much better. Amazingly simple. Try it. Now, there are many negative points on this presentation, and it wasn't meant to be this way. It's just this is the way the situation is. And people like A.B. Glaser would kind of laugh about this situation because they could overcome most of the things we've discussed and gone over here mentally. They can change the moleculars of cells mentally. And this is a subject that we cover in other presentations. But there isn't any disaster, health or otherwise, that you can't overcome mentally. The projection of mind thoughts, the kinetic mind energies. And until you do, you may have to use some of these substitutes that we've gone over here. But it behooves you, if you're interested in health and mental acuity, to look into the things we've gone through here, because you now have more secrets in this one little presentation than in any series of books that I'm aware of. And this is my business. Well, you'll recall that I constantly pointed out that stress was the #1 problem in this presentation. And to hold down stress in your life, I'm going to share a little secret with you. that very, very few persons in this world are aware of at this time. Now, in the 60s and 70s, you may recall that the mental health hospitals and facilities all over the world started using lithium on mentally disturbed patients who were constantly in stress. This was the most effective treatment ever found. It could be called the wonder drug of the mental health field. The drawback was the fact that this light metal was toxic if overdone. In the late 70s, a researcher named Haroldine found that crystals with a small percentage of lithium could also be used to cut down the tenseness and stress in the body. Well, since these crystals give off vibrations, the lithium vibration could bring certain negative body energies back to normal. And several researchers tested lithium crystals and were astounded at the ability to tone down the human trauma. And eventually it was found that water could be charged to some extent with the proper vibrations through these crystals. You just simply drop the crystals in water for a time and it would charge the water up. It could be done in drinking glasses or could be done within water pipes so the water passes around the crystals. They could be tied around water pipes. There were certain nurseries in Southern California that found that they put crystals in or around the water pipes, which irrigated the plants. The plants in their nurseries grew better, almost 20% greater profundity, and it was evidently due to the reduced stress factor introduced to the plants. Now, for most humans, they can use them, the crystals, as jewelry. And they can find tourmaline, kunzite, or lepidolite. All of them contain lithium. And here you're looking at kunzite crystals made into jewelry and singly. The only problem is that you have to discharge any negative vibrations that these crystals pick up every now and then. Now, every day or so, you'll dip them in running water or a bowl of water, or you can set them out in the sun a few hours. And this discharges the negative vibrations, which they can build up if you're around negative people or you're sending out negative vibrations. And this is a long, drawn-out study if you want to get into the techniques and technical aspects.